Hi, Amate. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today and engage in this interview. Um, to begin, how are you? How are
I'm
you coming
doing
in?
I'm doing great. It's starting to rain a little bit. The storm has subsided and now it's just a mild rain. So it feels like it's really nourishing all the plants and the beings outside.
Nice. So I know you somewhat well, and you are an amazing human being. And I want folks to get to know you a little bit before we get into the history of LREP, the Latinx Racial Equity Project. So tell me about you. Tell me about your lineage and your peoples.
Yeah. So I and my people come from Cushcatlan, which is the indigenous name of my homelands, and it's in the middle of the continent of the Americas. And our land evolved from volcano eruptions, and it's actually the newest land between the two big land masses of the Americas. And so my people are Nahuatl people. As with many places in Latin America and in the Caribbean, indigenous people's histories and stories and all about us was pretty much erased. And so we're all recovering our histories. And we know that in the land where my family comes from, Shorty Maya lived there thousands of years. And the story of our creation, it starts in actually Utah. And it's like the story of my elders tell is that our people originated in Utah, and because of all kinds of different changes, they ended up migrating down into El Salvador. And so we are related to
Um,
people from the north. We have relationships with people in central Mexico, and then obviously in Central America. And so those are the stories that have been shared with me. I am
wow.
the daughter of a single mother, who's worked as a housekeeper since she was 14. She was a
Mm,
little indigenous girl who was sent to the city to work for the rich mixed race and white people of my country. And she continues to do that work. And so I come from,
wow.
a family of peasant, rural, indigenous people in El Salvador.
Wow, thank you for sharing. Big ups to your mamas. And how does Amate become a movement organizer?
Well, I started to be more radicalized in college. I think that my high school experience is like this experience of many immigrant young people who come to the US, and we kind of are in a fog of learning English and learning to exist in this US context, and so in high school I was basically working hard to assimilate and to be able
Mhm.
to earn my way into, a college or a university education. And so it wasn't until I got to UC San Diego and they had an extensive history department. And as a first year person, I started taking all these upper level history classes because no one had ever told me the history of our peoples, right? So I started taking
Mhm.
classes on the history of Latin America and the history of Africa and the history of Asia. And literally, for the first 2 years of my college experience, I was taking classes where I had to read 5 books per class. And I couldn't believe all the stories that were hidden from me. And in that search, I found this amazing professor. His name was Charles Thomas, and he taught the history of the Black ghetto. And he's known
Mhm.
to be the father of Black psychology. And I had no idea of all that. I just knew that he was an inspirational teacher. And he introduced me to Black radical thought. And it just blew my mind. Like, I just, all of a sudden, I felt like I found a home in like critical thinking and understanding, my life experience and the life experience of many people around me through understanding like white supremacy and understanding capitalism, and all those things like no one ever really talked about or named in that way through high school and even in many of my college courses. And so he radically changed my trajectory. And from then, I started organizing against imperialism, starting with the first Gulf War, all the wars in Central America, You know,
Mm,
that was my introduction to organizing.
wow. And then in your life, at what would you say was the turning point where you decide that your work is going to be about racial equity?
Yeah, you know, I really swallowed the pill that if I worked hard, you know, that I would succeed and I would have the life that I wanted to, a life that afforded me comfort. You know, like I didn't want to be a struggling working class person like all of my family. You know, I knew that there was something else. And so I kept on climbing. You know, I graduated, you know, pretty much top of my class in graduate school in journalism. I thought I was going to have an incredible career as a writer. And then I got pregnant. And so I took a little U-turn and I took a job that, you know, I felt like I could use my skills and pay the bills. And I
Mhm.
worked for a foundation, a women's foundation that prided itself in supporting people of color. And, you know, all the trappings of internalized supremacy and white supremacy and patriarchy were playing out at that organization. And,
Mm,
you know, I ended up being fired. You know, so that being fired, like, you know, I hit a wall. I hit a huge wall and I couldn't understand what had happened. And I literally fell into this deep depression where I spent a year, like, where I couldn't stop crying.
mhm,
All my value and all the stories of like assimilation just, you know, crashed for me. And my eyes really got open, you know, and I started to ask questions like, how could an all women's organization that's half people of color um, replicate the violence that they said they're fighting? You know, like,
mhm,
could they have treated me with more humanity and respect?
mhm,
And you know, and I started to really look at the systems of oppression and how they actually play out every day in the way that we behave towards each other, the way that we treat people in organizations, the way that we are not in alignment with the principles of the world that we're trying to create. And so that got me seeking more information about oppression, and I ended up going to a Visions anti-racism training. And it was as if like the curtains pulled, like all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like that's what I've been experiencing my whole
mhm,
life. Like I just could, it was as if, you know, I took the blue pill in the Matrix, you know, it literally all
mhm.
of a sudden my whole life made sense. And I found um, a freedom in that. Like I could understand, I had new words to describe the experiences I was feeling.
I
And
can
that,
relate to that for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And
Mhm.
then there was no turning back, right? Like
Right.
then once you find it, there's like, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And that's why they say ignorance is bliss. Once you are not ignorant or unaware, you can't really turn back, or you could try to turn back, but it's really gonna like mess with you inside. So at what point then the idea for Latinx Racial Equity Project is born?
Yeah. Well, you know, from that moment, I decided that where I needed to be was organizing my own people, right? So
Okay.
I went and started working in the immigrant rights movement in San Francisco and did a lot of coalition building across race. And so I started to see like firsthand, like the ways that Latinx people or brown people get pitted against African Americans and all the narratives about Blackness that like continue to make like real true collaboration impossible, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that experience really opened my eyes to the ways that this oppression was playing out among and between us. And I happened to be at a meeting with a multiracial coalition, and the shit started breaking down. Like, you know, people were
Mm,
like infighting. And then when it was time to go into caucus spaces, some of the immigrant Latin people were like, we're not people of color, you know, and that really pissed off African American people who were like, wait, we have fought so hard to be recognized as like people of color, to like fight on like issues of race. How is it that these like newcomers like don't see that, right? And so there was this major disconnect that created more separation and more distance. And so at that point, I was like, oh my goodness, like there is a huge missing body of work. And the body of work is like supporting Latin people, and people from the Caribbean who come to the US to understand the legacy of fighting against racism in the US, to understand how this country was formed, to understand the roots of migration, like imperialism and the ways that the US has intervened in many of our nations in the South and in the Caribbean, right? And so like that lack of political education, leads immigrant people to come here and to only see what's happened in the last 10 years, not understand the last 100 years, the last 500 years of stories and history. And so that was the impetus. I really wanted Latin people to be able to show up more ready to like deeply engage on tackling white supremacy and racism, which are the foundations to why we have poverty, why we don't have good education, why we are dying of chronic illnesses that are preventable. It all comes down to these economies of structures that are based on oppressing Black people, Indigenous people, people of color.
Yes, for sure. Louder and in Spanish for the people in the back. Last year, during this month, actually, during Black History Month, I had a conversation with my mother about how we as Dominican people from the Latin American and Spanish speaking Caribbean come to immigrate to the United States and are able to have things like home ownership, which she does in Miami, Florida. And we're able to benefit from things like Section 8 housing and EBT food stamps, and like how all of those things are because Black US people, African American people, made those wins possible for us. And there is a rhetoric that I hear a lot in my family that I think they learned it through Reagan, of like Black people are like taking all of the social benefits, and it's kind of just like it's stuck. And so yeah, similarly to you, I come to do racial equity work because I wanted to organize my family, because even though I didn't know the language, I knew what they were saying was not correct. And so yes, I appreciate that organizations like LREP exist, and yes, I look forward to the day when this work could reach people like my family. So what wins and changes have you seen happen since LREP's existence?
So it's our 10th year anniversary. Woohoo, right?
Woo!
Like 10 years of doing this work. And I feel like our organization has gotten great momentum. And in our country and in Latin America, I think that there's been some amazing changes too. Like our people have always been organizing, and we've been organizing for our rights. There's been many civil wars that have been fought. There's been many revolutionary movements that have been going on. And yet, throughout that time, like a claim for like anti-racism or for the rights of Indigenous people or for the rights of Black people in Latin America were not so clear. And now it's like we see a difference. Like Black people in Latin America and Black Latin American and Caribbeans in the US are organizing, demanding, that Black lives actually matter, right? Like that our people's lives from our places actually matter. And we're also seeing a huge rising in the number of Indigenous-led and Indigenous organizations that are also claiming rights of Indigenous people and claiming and understanding the legacy of Indigenous people in the South and their connection to land, right? And so I feel like that's changed a lot. I think that our work is even more needed now than before, right? Because there's so many Latin people who are mixed race or who are white Latin or even Black and Indigenous Latin who are still in that fog that I was in before, my world came crashing, that we still believe that our best way forward is to assimilate and to, buy into like white America. And actually, we have a lot of other options, right? Like we don't have to assimilate into white America in order to achieve success. In fact, like if we bring our collective principles of family, of community, of the way that we organize back home, our connections to each other, that we can bring that to the forefront to be able to create change. And so, um, successes, we are still here. Our staff has, tripled. We have a solid amount of offerings that are both like trainings and, our newsletters and the way that we engage in social media to raise consciousness. All that have been huge wins. We went from being like an idea to actually like creating a curriculum and to training more than 600 people, and to having those people be connected to our community, our, pro-Black, pro-Indigenous, Latine community, that to me is a huge win, and I'm seeing like some of the bigger like Latine organizations start to like highlight and center Black and Indigenous peoples, and
Mhm.
I want to take some credit for that. Like some of those organizations we actually directly worked with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And others we were able to influence from just existing. And so just to plant those seeds and to challenge this notion of Latinidad as this like blended brownness that doesn't actually celebrate, the incredible spiritual, cultural, political contributions of Black and Indigenous Latin people, um, is not acceptable anymore, that we want to be able to highlight and benefit and celebrate those contributions.
Yeah, definitely. And Amate, how does it feel to go from founder of an organization to now a staff person or an organization? And can you talk to us a little bit about, um, like debunking power and sharing in a non-hierarchical way? And also talk to us about the name of your role, which is very beautiful.
Oh, thank you. um yeah, I'm the emergent strategy director, which I love, right? And I'm doing what I do best, right? Like what I do best is I can sense the field and I can feel what's needed, and I can use my creativity and my knowledge to develop tools that support people to grow and transform. And so this role allows me to do that. And, I think that I was in that my process of decolonization, right? First, I had to decolonize from this idea that assimilation is what the game was about, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like my next layer of decolonization was to understand that work does not have to happen under the traditional military industrial complex structures,
Mm-hmm.
profits, right? That where you have a director and then you have people below you, and that the what you want to do is be on top, right? That actually work and impact can happen through distributed power, like all the things that we dreamed about in our equity model, right? Like that we
Mm-hmm.
needed to walk that walk. Like we couldn't
Mm-hmm.
be telling people, hey, distributed power is where it's at, when we haven't experienced that. And so I think that the shifting the structure of the organization was another like wave of decolonization, and of course like it felt awkward, to let go of power and to stop being the sole decision maker, right? And it takes trust in the people that I work with, that I know that they're as committed as I am to this vision, and that I trust their compass, and I know their political orientation, and I know their spiritual practices. And I think that building that level of trust and releasing control actually allows the seed to spread further, and the tree is more deeply rooted when it's held by many rather than just by myself. um, and of
Definitely.
course there were bumps, like I had a lot of really bad habits of being like la mandona. I loved telling people what to do, and I loved you know um, assigning work to people,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's like they assign work to themselves. People, we all assign our own work, and we are all responsible to deliver what we say we're going to do. And so it's a lot more freeing, and it's so much more fun to work in this way.
Yeah, because things like telling people what to do, it's comes more from like, yeah, white supremacy. It's a white supremacist culture, practice. And so what are ancestral practices? What are things from your lineage? What are that ways of knowing how to heal that you bring now into your work, both as a staff person and as a facilitator? Because you also mentioned our model. So if people have never been to our training, you won't be aware that there are certain pieces that that we cover, including the one that you just mentioned about distribution of power and equitable power. So yeah, so talk to us a little bit about how you bring that into this work.
Yeah. Well, for me, prayer is everything. And prayer, not like maybe in the traditional way, that you like sit and pray. But prayer can be like a moment of just pausing and noticing, the way the lemon's growing on this tree that's right in front of me, and like being aware that this tree is giving me energy to be able to exist and to do my work. And so I feel like those ways of knowing, like knowing that everything's connected and that whatever I put into everything, it's like that's what I get back. And so that's one of I feel like the traditional practices that really ground me. In prayer, I know that my role is to channel, what Creator wants of me, what she is guiding me to. And I can see that Creator is in every person that I'm interacting with. And so my job is to support them in channeling, what they're meant to contribute to our communities. I also think that the practice of being in deep relationship, I think I used to be like a little bit more in superficial relationship. Like I had good friendships, but being in deep relationship means like understanding, like what are the things that inspire this human being? What are the things that are deeply challenging to this human being? Like what are ways that I can just with my energy support this human being to be better, to grow? And like I've learned to be a deeper listener, not just for the words that are coming out of people, but for like the energy and ask questions, and affirm people. I feel like that what our people need most is to be affirmed, for the wounds that they have suffered. And so I feel like feeling the wounding of our people is something that I've been nourishing, and I think it's part of my intuition and just like love in practice, right? Like, how do I practice love? Um, and so being open to those messages, one of the practices that I do with anyone I work with and even people that I train is before I go into the training, I focus myself on love and I say, I'm going to find something that I love about every human being that's in the circle, even the ones that are a pain in the ass, like even the ones that are there that I feel like are there to sabotage or like contradict me or don't listen to me. I used to come at them with a lot of like punishment, right? But that's what we're used to. And so like now I try to come from a place of love. Like, what of this individual can I love, authentically love? And how do I speak to that thing or that piece about them that I really love? Instead of like, how do I correct the piece about them that I hate? And I think that has made a really big difference.
That's beautiful. Wow. So much of what you said resonated. I'm in a similar place of one of the things I'm most grateful to racial equity work is that it's also allowed me to deepen my relationships and come to them from a place of vulnerability, authenticity, reciprocity, and yeah, and love, and that our survival depends on one another. And, unfortunately, that when you grow up under white supremacy, when you grow up under colonization, it does such a number of trauma on you that you harm each other with words. You
Yeah.
harm each other with lack of connection and with this idea of like, siempre ha sido así,
Mm-hmm.
entonces hay que continuar. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think a lot of people, a lot of Latine folks that do racial equity work are, yeah, are really like disrupting this white supremacist generational curse.
Yeah.
And
Oof, I love that. The white supremacist generational curse. Yeah. I
yeah.
think of it as a virus, you know, like it just
Mm,
like, and then what is the immunization against this virus? You know, it's like I've been reflecting both on like white supremacy as a virus and sort of the spell that we get into. It's like Alzheimer's, you know, like our like we forget, you know, we have been trained to forget, you know, that we
mm-hmm.
actually come from greatness. We have
Yeah.
been trained to believe, you know, that in order to survive, we have to become white, you know, or be as white as possible to be able to achieve. And all those things are not true. Like that's one path, but it's not the only path.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like you said, love, knowledge, being mirrors to one another. Because it's one thing that's because you could have very easily come out of that visions training and been like, I'm holier than thou. Look at all this information I have, and not turn inward and say, wait, there's work that I have to do, and there's work that my people have to do. So let me get my people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's very like knowledge sharing is very important. Like you're saying, also like affirmations, because yeah, you do these trainings. Yes, we work for an organization like LREP, and we are not absolved of how white supremacy shows up in our daily habits. It's like
Mm-hmm.
an ongoing practice.
Yeah.
So then my next question is, what invitation do you have for people from Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean who are looking to pursue liberation in this lifetime? What are practices? What are habits? What are experiences, relationships that they could be, that they could be seeking to have liberation in this lifetime?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that the biggest invitation is we can be free, you know, even if it's in like moments, like even if it's like 1 hour or like a day or like a month, you know, like that we can practice being free. Like I feel like, yes, we need to work for a day when all of our people are liberated, right? And we can do that struggle and that work every day. And I deserve the right to have moments of liberation and freedom. And what I mean by that is like I deserve to shut off the constant nagging of white supremacy, you know, and Western patriarchal ways that constantly tell me that I'm not enough, you know, that I'll
Mm-hmm.
never be enough, that I have to do something else in order to have the right to belong or in order to exist, right? All that is based on like legacy of colonization and white supremacy and oppression. You know, can I give myself permission to exist? And exist for who I am. And then that requires me to investigate and to get curious about what are all the hidden stories that have been purposely kept away from me, both like in my family of origin, you know, like who were the family members that no one wanted to talk about? You'll find Black people, you'll find Indigenous people, you'll find queer people that were hidden from our own family histories. Then we can expand that to say, what were the stories of our nations and our countries that were hidden from us and why? And then what are the stories of our collective experience as Latine people that are hidden? Why is it that we're not connecting the dots between the ousting of our events in Guatemala in 1954 to the coup in Chile, to the coup in Brazil, to to like what's happening in Haiti now? Like, why is it that we're not connecting the dots? Who benefits from us not connecting the dots? What are
Mm-hmm.
the hidden stories and how do they relate to me? And how does that inform who I am? So I think that having that knowledge, and the practice of curiosity, and the
Mm-hmm.
practice of like self-reflection on being critical, and love, like we talked about it as like love as like I care about or I love something in a person. But love also is corrective feedback, right? Like being able to say to somebody, I love you, and the way you spoke to me hurt me, and the
Mm-hmm.
way you spoke to me shows, that you're anti-Indigenous bias, or it shows your anti-Blackness in this moment. And I need you to do this differently. Like that is the ultimate form of love, because I'm loving you by supporting you to be the best human being that you can be. So I think, I think it takes, it's an invitation to be awake, to fully wake up to this life and to say, what is it that I want to do with this incredible gift of my life and being born in this time, and how do I plant the seeds so that our children's children's children, and I'm not talking about blood family only, right? Like descendants who are here to come, that they have a different experience than I do. That the stories that they uncover maybe are stories of liberation and triumph versus oppression. Like imagine that. Like wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah. And what practices do you suggest to people when they get scared?
That's a really good question. Yeah.
What's something that you've done in the times where being brave or being, outspoken or, being in right relationship to this work has become a little challenging?
Yeah. Well, you can imagine. I mean, I've been particularly really early on, like, I got shit on by a lot of people. Like even today, some people are like, why are you wasting your time doing that work? Like we should be fighting to get our people to vote, or like we should be fighting to get people housing. And all those things are true. And like if we're not building, in the ways that we need to build to create a different world, then we're going to have those short-term wins, but we're going to be replicating systems that don't serve us.
Right.
To me, like understanding the difference between fear and actual righteous power has been really helpful. Because sometimes like when I've spoken up and I think I feel fear, because I feel that like butterflies in my belly, or I feel like my heart like comes up to my throat. Those moments to me, I used to think I was afraid. Oh my God, I'm afraid to speak up in front of this group of powerful people. But I've learned that actually that's the moments when spirit is channeling through so powerfully that I have to honor like what it is that like earth and all the beings and creators trying to have me say. And so, so I just listen. Like the moment I feel butterflies, I think, thank you, creator. Thank you. What is meant to be said, and then I say it in the best ways that I can. Like to not harm if it's not needed, to speak from a place of love, even when it's harsh, to make sure that I'm speaking not out of anger, but out of like groundedness. And that groundedness can sound like angry sometimes,
Right.
because sometimes we have to speak powerfully in ways that people can hear us. But I know that that energy is not meant to harm, it's about meant to build. And so I
Right.
feel understanding that. And of course, there's like places of real fear, and in those times, like what I practice is I go to people that I trust, and I say, I'm having this fear. Like, can you help me, feel it through,
Yeah.
and I get that protection and support that I need, and then ground it with that. Then I go face that challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I've been in situations with my family where I've cried. I've cried and they're like, ¿Por qué tú estás llorando? That's why we can never talk about this. And it's like, I'm gonna talk about this and I'm gonna cry while I do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a very vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
And it hurts.
And
It
I,
hurts
yeah,
to
and I
see.
think that that's one of our secret powers,
Mm,
or superpowers, right? Like, there's, I can't remember her name, but there's a writer who wrote about that we are sentipensantes, like we're
mm,
feeling thinking people, right? That
That's
we,
me. That's me.
right, yeah, those things, right? And so like, so how the feelings are another incredible source of knowledge. And then there's like thoughts, right? And we can do both. We can think, we can feel as more knowledge, and we can also channel spiritual, messages. Like, sometimes like I have an active conversations with my ancestors, like one in particular, and
Mhm.
sometimes when I'm at a loss with things, like one a long time I never met her. but I know she was real, and I know that she's part of my family.
Mm-hmm.
When she started coming to me, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and so our job is to be able to be open to all those different ways of knowing, and to be able to bring it forward to be our full selves.
Yeah. So speaking about ancestors, so let's imagine Amate is a good ancestor.
Mm.
What is the legacy of Latinx Racial Equity Project? What was the radical vision that you had while you were here, and what was made possible?
Oh, I love that question. I really imagine like Latin people, and Latin are, Latin America and the Caribbean, right? All of us, um, who become this unstoppable force for change, like, and transformation, radical transformation of systems. I
Mm,
imagine that we are like really armed with our individual and collective stories and histories, like that
mm,
we understand like where our oppression is really rooted, and collectively like we create a radical new future, where
mm-hmm,
we're addressing the wrongs of the past. Like we are following the leadership of Black and Indigenous, and women and trans people, and people who have been at the margins, who may have really not may, but who have incredible visions of what's possible, right? Like
mm-hmm,
I imagine like the way that we're showing up is in like grounded, selves, like that, where we understand our trauma, and we actually can work with our trauma to do that, to think and feel and to channel spirit, like in the way that we show up, with each other, in our organizations, with movements. I imagine us like from that place of knowing our privilege and our responsibility, of people who live in the belly of the beast, who have access to US dollars to create co-ops of like transnational power building.
mm,
Dominicans can like organize with Dominicans all over the US and have deep links to the people in the Dominican Republic, and follow the leadership of people who live on the island, to be
mm-hmm,
able to support transformation there, and that's happening with Salvadorans and with, you know, Brazilians, and with, because all these folks understand, that extractive economies that, rely on the sacrifices of Black, Indigenous, queer bodies,
mm-hmm,
that needs to be transformed, right? Like, and that systems of more equity and economies that are sustainable and that are good for humans and for the planet, that is the goal, that's what we need to build. So
mm-hmm,
I see us as like, the most amazing transformation like agents, that
mm.
can really fuel, you know, a, real justice and like real change and real liberation here in the US and in our homelands.
Thank you. Ashe, amen, aho.
Yeah, yes. And so it
And
is.
yes, and so it is. And lastly, and I could keep going talking to you about this, but lastly, who do we who do we have to give attribution and acknowledgments to for the Amate that we spoke to today?
Hmm.
Or you mentioned visions as an instrumental piece of how you come into understanding systems of oppression and racism. But yes, any other organization, any people that you want to name who are alive or or an ancestor.
Mhm.
Yes, we want to give credit to those people and thank them.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, like my personal lineage ancestors, for all that they survived and all that they lived through and all their incredible knowledge, and that was passed on to me. My abuelita Cruz, who taught me to walk in traditional ways, who taught me that it doesn't matter who made the mess, and it doesn't matter if there's other people around, but if you saw the mess, you clean the mess, quietly and without making a big deal out of it. Many ways I feel like, I am and we are cleaning the mess of white supremacy and the havoc that it has created in our communities. We see it, we're cleaning it as best we can. My mother, who worked as a housekeeper from age 14 until now, and I know that her earnings, she's still, I think she makes like $20,000 a year,
Mhm.
that is what allowed me to go to college, and that I am who I am because of her work. I
Mhm.
mentioned Charles Thomas, without his radical, eye-opening intervention in my life, I think it would have taken me much longer to connect all the dots. Valerie Batts, another African American woman who lived in the segregated South, who developed all the tools of visions. She's my friend and my mentor and my elder, and I'm so deeply grateful to have her in my life. Like, she continues to help me be in the, aligned to my principles. And then I have a lot of Indigenous teachers who teach me and who are in connection with me, like
Mhm.
Jerry Teo, Doña Queta, my elders in Izalco, which I still practice ceremony with, Norma Wong, my Indigenous siblings of the North who like schooled me and who brought me in, because I do a lot of deep work with them. And foremost, like, we are a chain we're a link in a long chain of liberation fighters who like forever, you know, have been like dreaming of a different world, dreaming of um, ending oppression, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm grateful to them. Like, without their efforts, in particular, we've talked really clearly about the contributions of Black Americans to our freedom fighting ways. And so I'm deeply grateful to them. And of course, to my team, I love my team. I love who I work with. And then there's like more than 600 people who've been like, yes, what you're doing is right. We want to get trained, who participated with us. I have to also like give huge gratitude to Genevieve Comrie Williams Comrie, who, took a leap with me. Like, we barely knew each other. And the first year of LREP, I came to her and I said, help me build this curriculum, to
Mhm.
center Black and Indigenous people and to support Latin people to unlearn internalized oppression. And she did it. And she
Mhm.
helped me create the first curriculum and helped me teach. We co-taught the first few workshops together. And so, there's been, people have believed in this effort and they've given their contributions. And I'm grateful to them.
Beautiful. I'm grateful to them too. Thank you. Thank you, Amate, for taking time to speak with me. I am super excited that this is our first episode of our Latinx Racial Equity Project YouTube channel. Thank you to those who watched today. And if you, if you resonated with what was being spoken about today, Latinx Racial Equity Project has public offerings that we'll be putting out soon. So make sure to click the link below to subscribe to our mailing list, where we'll be sharing more details about that soon. We also are available, and Amate is one of our main facilitators to do consulting work with organizations, not just in the United States, but also elsewhere. And if anything from this video resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a comment. Thank you, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yay, you too. Thank you. It's lovely to see you again.
Likewise.